Mons, Belgium, a quiet city steeped in history, cobblestone streets, and old-world charm. But in the late 1990s, it became the hunting ground for a predator, a killer who dismembered his victims and left their remains scattered in garbage bags, each one a message, each one a mystery. Over 5 women vanished, and only pieces of them were ever found. Welcome to the shadows, where fear comes to life. If you crave chilling stories, bone-rattling horror news, and the twisted tales that haunt your dreams, you've found your dark corner of YouTube. This is Horror Locker, your guide through the macabre, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. So light a candle, lock the doors, and let's dive into the darkness together. March 22nd, 1997. It was a cold, gray morning in Mons, Belgium. A chill hung in the air as a local man walked his dog along the Haine River. Near a weir in the Nîmes district, the dog veered off the path, growling at something tucked in the underbrush. The man approached hesitantly, then froze in horror. A green plastic garbage bag, bloated and tied with rough twine, had split open to reveal what was unmistakably a severed human leg. Police were called, and the initial horror soon deepened. Officers scouring the nearby embankments along Rue Emile Vandervelde in the village of Quesmas discovered a total of 9 garbage bags, scattered and partially submerged. Each bag contained dismembered human remains, arms, legs, torsos, wrapped in layers of plastic and cloth. Some limbs were neatly severed, disarticulated at the joints with what investigators would later describe as surgical precision. Detective Lucas de Smet was called to the scene. A man who had seen too much but slept too little, de Smet had transferred to Mons from Brussels just months before. The sight that greeted him near the riverbank set his jaw tight. "This isn't rage," he muttered to his partner, Inspector Veronique Delot. "This is ritual." The press caught the scent quickly. Headlines splashed across Belgium: "Body parts in bags, butcher on the loose." Thus began the reign of the so-called Butcher of Mons. The next day, March 23, 1997, brought no relief. More garbage bags were discovered, this time in Mons itself. Among them was a woman's torso, recently severed, the flesh pink and not yet bloated with water. Pathologists would later determine this victim had likely been killed within the last 48 hours. Unlike the other remains found in Quesmas, which appeared to have been refrigerated, perhaps for months, this torso spoke of a killer who was both active and calculating, mixing fresh horror with carefully preserved remains. April arrived with more grim discoveries. Along the banks of the Haine River, some 30 minutes' drive from Mons, police recovered additional bags. Inside were a woman's head, a foot, and a leg. One of the bags contained a trace amount of semen, and another held brightly colored women's underwear, carefully folded as if they were keepsakes. De Smet stood over the evidence table that night and whispered, "Trophies. He's proud of this." The pathology report confirmed what de Smet feared. The dismemberment showed knowledge of anatomy. Whoever had done this knew how to cut around ligaments, how to slice cleanly between bones. A surgeon? A butcher? Or something worse, a man who had studied bodies not for healing, but for harm. By the time the last bag was pulled from the river, the entire province was gripped with fear. Mothers walked their daughters home from school. Bars emptied earlier than usual. And somewhere in the tangle of dark alleys and canals, a killer moved unseen, methodical and unhurried. Detective de Smet lit a cigarette, staring at the map of Mons littered with red pins. "He's not dumping to get rid of them," he said aloud. "He's leaving a message." And the message had only just begun. De Smet kept a corkboard in his office at the precinct, lined with Polaroids and timelines, threads of red yarn connecting dates, streets, and names. The victims weren't statistics to him. He spoke their names aloud sometimes, as if to ward off the darkness creeping into his own mind. Nathalie was just 22 when she disappeared in March 1997. Her bust was found in the Haine River, wrapped and discarded like an afterthought. But De Smet couldn't shake her face from his memory. The soft eyes, the way her photograph seemed to hint at both vulnerability and defiance. She was a mother, though her child had been taken into care long before. She lived in a small bedsit in Mons, a building that reeked of mildew and secrets. Bartenders downtown remembered her, young, charming, flirtatious. Some whispered she was promiscuous, but her sister adamantly denied any ties to sex work. De Smet believed the sister. This killer, he noted in his journal, doesn't choose victims based on profession. He chooses ghosts, women no one will come looking for too quickly. Jacqueline Leclerc. Jacqueline was 33 when she went missing on December 22, 1996, a Sunday. She had 4 children, though none lived with her. De Smet visited her former apartment, a drafty unit with toys still tucked into closets, forgotten. She had split from her husband, and while she'd once tried to rebuild, addiction and isolation gnawed at her life. That morning, she was reportedly on her way to the butcher's shop. A simple errand. She never returned. Her arms and legs were discovered on March 22, 1997, in one of the first garbage bags recovered below Rue Emile van der Velde in Cuesmes. De Smet circled that street on foot dozens of times, imagining how someone could haul heavy bags into the brush unnoticed. He learned Jacqueline often lingered near the train station in Mons, a known gathering point for the vulnerable. She was already living in the killer's shadow, he thought, before he ever touched her. Begonia Valencia was 37 when she disappeared from her home in Framries during the summer of 1997. Divorced and a mother to 1 daughter, Begonia had long struggled with schizophrenia and spent periods in psychiatric rehabilitation. According to her daughter, she had become so weak she could barely walk, with black ulcers forming on her back from prolonged bed rest. Yet every evening, she would gather herself enough to ride the local bus, a habit a neighbor confirmed to investigators. Her remains were discovered in an orchard near Hyon, though parts of her body had already been found earlier in the same distinctive green garbage bags. To De Smet, her case felt particularly cruel. "Who dismembers someone who can't even stand?" he wrote. This wasn't opportunism, it was selection. Martine Beaune, 43, had lived a life on society's edge. Born in France, she had previously worked in sex work and frequented seedy bars across Belgium and northern France. Martine was transgender and estranged from her family, a woman who had rebuilt herself only to vanish on Sunday, July 21, 1996. Her torso was found that same month in the Haine River, and when police recovered more of her remains, they noted a particularly disturbing detail. Her breasts had been surgically removed. De Smet stared long at the autopsy photos. "This one was personal," he whispered, "a message or a mockery." Martine's death spoke of a killer both cold and cruel, someone who dissected identity as easily as he did flesh. Carmelina Russo, aged 42, disappeared on January 4, 1996. She worked as a product demonstrator in a department store and lived in a modest flat not far from Mons. That day, she had visited her son, incarcerated at the time, and was last seen shopping near her apartment. When she didn't return, police initially suspected suicide. But that theory collapsed when her pelvis was discovered weeks later in the Scheldt River, just across the border in France. The killer had gone international. De Smet was struck by the precision of the disposal, the way her remains had been fragmented and distanced. Someone wanted her erased, he concluded, not just killed, scattered. The places where the bags were discovered formed a grotesque map through Mons. Rue de Depot, Dump Street, Chemin de l'Inquiétude, the Path of Worry, the river's Hain, hate, and Trui jitters. Whether the killer meant it or not, there was poetry in his horror. Initially, police described the perpetrator as a highly intelligent, ritual psychopath. They assumed he had medical training based on the apparent precision of the cuts and the surgical wrapping of the parts. But that theory began to crack. One thigh, for instance, had 3 incision attempts before the correct joint was found. That didn't speak of expertise, it spoke of trial and error. The FBI profile painted a different picture. A methodical man, perhaps with a steady job, likely operating on weekends. But timelines were murky. Victims went missing on different days. Carmelina on a Thursday, Begonia likely sometime midweek, making the weekend killer theory less reliable. Belgian psychiatrists concluded the killer was meticulous, anal retentive, obsessive in his neatness. But again, that clinical image clashed with inconsistent cuts and the occasional careless discard, like the skull left outside a bag in the orchard. Some evidence hinted at sexual rage. Martine's mutilation, the removal of her breasts, may have been driven by the discovery that she was transgender. If the killer's motivation was sexual, such a revelation could have triggered fury and revulsion. It might also explain the trophies, women's underwear folded and preserved, and the semen trace found on one of the victims. Despite the months between disappearances, the remains appeared fresh upon discovery. Officers remarked on the lack of decomposition, suggesting refrigeration. This opened new questions. Did the killer work in a mortuary, a butcher's shop, or a hospital morgue? Or did he own a large private freezer hidden in solitude? Either scenario implied planning, privacy, and control. Even the knots used to tie the bags were consistent, deliberate, practiced, maybe even symbolic. Yet, there were moments of inconsistency. A skull exposed in the orchard, cuts that seemed rushed. Could these be mistakes? Or did the killer want to create confusion? But victimology remained the clearest insight. Each woman was vulnerable through poverty, illness, addiction, or marginalization. Many used public transport. Some were known to accept rides. They were not chosen at random. They were chosen because they could be taken. And as the case files stacked higher and the trail ran colder, Desmet looked at the corkboard, now filled edge to edge. He hides behind masks, he told Deleu. Profession, motive, even skill. But in the end, he's just a man who sees broken wings and plucks them off one by one. The Butcher of Mons was never caught, but his shadow still lingers on the banks of the Heine. If you made it this far, congratulations, you've survived for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell, because in the world of horror, you never know what's lurking next. Got a creepy story, a twisted theory, or a horror film you think we should unearth? Drop it in the comments, I'll be watching. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and whatever you do, don't look behind you.